There is a state that is very hard to name. It is not a crisis. It is not depression. It is not an obvious collapse. On the outside, everything is still running. You still work. You still talk. You still move inside familiar routines. But inside, something has shifted very slightly. So slightly that no one around you notices. So slightly that even you once thought you were imagining it. You no longer feel fully inside familiar moments. Conversations still happen, but you hear them as if from far away. Things that once excited you now only make sense logically. You are not sad, but you are not joyful. You are not lost, but you no longer feel like you are moving in the right direction. Sometimes you ask yourself if you have changed, or if you are just tired, or if you are asking too much of yourself. Then there are strange moments. A morning when you wake up and everything feels clearer, as if something is opening, as if something is about to begin, but the feeling does not stay. It fades quickly, and you return to the old state carrying a quiet question: if I have already seen it, why can I not hold it? You start observing yourself more closely, watching your thoughts, watching your emotions, watching even the smallest changes in your body. But the more you observe, the more you feel yourself standing at the edge, no longer fully belonging to the old, but not yet touching the new, like standing between two breaths, between two versions, between two ways of existing. And if you are hearing these words now, it may not be because you are searching for answers. It may be because a part of you recognizes that this state is not random, that something began earlier, and it has not yet been named. You did not arrive here by accident. Not because an algorithm decided to show you something interesting, not because you were searching for answers at the right moment. This video appears when a certain inner sequence has already been unfolding for a long time, long before you noticed the first signs, long before you could explain what felt different, long before you had language for it. There is a journey that does not begin with a dramatic collapse or a sudden awakening. It begins quietly, almost politely. Life keeps moving. Days still pass. Responsibilities still exist. From the outside, nothing breaks. And that is exactly why it is so easy to ignore at first. You keep going because everything still works. But deep inside, something has already shifted its orientation. Not forward or backward, but inward. You begin noticing that your reactions are slower, that you pause before responding, that old motivations no longer push you the way they used to. You still do the same things, but the reason you do them feels thinner, less solid. You are not dissatisfied in a dramatic way. You are simply no longer fully convinced. This is usually the point where people try to fix themselves. They assume something is wrong, they add effort, they add goals, they add stimulation, they distract themselves. And sometimes that works for a while, but for you it probably did not. Because what you are moving through is not a problem that effort can solve. It is a passage that cannot be rushed and cannot be skipped. At some point, you may have noticed a strange contradiction. You became more aware, more sensitive, more perceptive, and yet at the same time, more easily drained. You saw patterns faster, but felt less anchored in them. You understood more, but trusted less. You may have thought you were losing stability, but in reality, you were losing something else. You were losing the old reference points that used to tell you who you were. This journey does not come with a clear starting signal. There is no announcement, no moment where everything changes overnight. Instead, there is a gradual thinning of the old structure. The roles you played start feeling heavy, not painful, just heavy. The identities you once relied on begin to feel like clothing that no longer fits your body. You can still wear them, but you are constantly adjusting them, pulling at the edges, feeling restricted in ways you cannot explain to others. During this phase, people often say things like, "You seem different," or you are quieter than before, or you are thinking too much. They mean well, but they cannot see what is happening beneath the surface, because from the outside you are still functional, but internally you are approaching something, not a destination, a threshold, an invisible one. You do not know where it is. You do not know when you crossed it, or if you already have. You only know that something no longer works the way it used to. Time begins to behave differently here. Some days move very fast, others feel stretched. You replay conversations long after they end. You sense meaning in small moments that you cannot explain logically. You start noticing pauses, gaps, silence between thoughts. And instead of filling them immediately, you linger there without realizing why. This is not curiosity. It is not searching. It is not growth in the way it is usually described. It is more like gravity, slowly changing direction. You may have tried to describe this to yourself as personal development, or awakening, or burnout, or transition, but none of those words fully captured it, because what you are experiencing does not fit neatly into any category. It is not that your life is falling apart. It is that it no longer feels assembled the same way. The pieces are still there, but the logic that held them together is loosening. This is where many people turn back. They tighten their grip. They double down on certainty. They rebuild old structures, even if those structures already feel hollow. But if you are here now, that likely did not work for you. Something in you resisted going back, even when going forward was unclear, even when staying in between felt uncomfortable. You kept moving, not towards something specific, but away from pretending, away from forcing meaning, away from performing certainty you no longer felt. That is why this video meets you here. Not to tell you where you are going, not to label what you are experiencing, but to acknowledge the space you are already in. A space where the old story has lost its authority, but the new story has not yet spoken. A space where you are not broken, but you are no longer buffered by familiar explanations. A space where you can feel that something important is unfolding, but cannot yet name it. This is the part of the journey that is rarely talked about because it does not look impressive. There are no revelations to show, no achievements to announce, no transformation others can applaud. And yet, it is one of the most precise moments in the entire process. Because once you pass fully through this invisible threshold, there is no returning to unconscious alignment. You can pretend, you can delay, you can distract yourself, but you cannot unknow what you have already sensed. The reason this video appears now is not because it contains answers. It is because it recognizes the timing. It meets you at the exact point where pretending to be who you were is more exhausting than not knowing who you are becoming. It meets you when you are no longer satisfied with surface explanations but not yet ready for conclusions. It meets you when your awareness has outgrown your identity but has not yet stabilized into something new. You do not need to understand this yet. You do not need to agree with it. You only need to notice whether something in you feels seen by it. Because that recognition is not created by words. It is triggered by alignment, and alignment only happens when something arrives at the right moment. There is a moment that almost everyone misses because it does not announce itself as a crisis. Nothing collapses, nothing breaks, nothing obvious goes wrong. From the outside, your life still looks fine. You wake up, you go where you need to go, you complete tasks, you respond when spoken to, you function, and because you function, you tell yourself that everything must be fine. You have no clear reason to complain, no dramatic loss to point at, no visible failure that would justify feeling off. And yet, something inside you is no longer aligned. It starts as a quiet discomfort, not pain, not fear, just a subtle sense that you are slightly out of place inside your own life. You still recognize everything around you, the rooms, the faces, the routines, but you do not feel fully inside them anymore. It is as if you are standing half a step behind yourself, watching your own movements. You hear yourself speak, and you know the words are correct, but they do not feel fully sourced from you. They sound practiced, appropriate, expected, but not alive. At first, you assume you are tired, or distracted, or overstimulated. You blame the pace of life, the screens, the noise, the constant input. You tell yourself that rest will fix it, that a break will reset you, that once things slow down, you will feel normal again. But even when you rest, the feeling does not fully leave. It softens, it quiets, but it stays. You begin to notice it most clearly in moments that used to feel grounding. Conversations with people you care about feel strangely hollow, not because the other person has changed, but because you are not meeting the moment from the same place. You listen, you respond, you even laugh, but there is a part of you that remains untouched, like you are watching yourself participate rather than actually participating. You do not feel disconnected from reality in a dramatic way. You still understand what is happening. You still care, but your care feels muted, filtered, as if something is buffering you from full contact. This is the kind of disconnection that is hard to describe because it does not remove you from life. It removes depth. You are still present, but not immersed. Still aware, but not anchored. Still moving, but without the same sense of direction. What makes this stage confusing is that nothing is obviously wrong. In fact, many things may be going well. You may be progressing outwardly, achieving goals, gaining stability, receiving recognition, and because of that, you question yourself. You tell yourself you should be grateful. You tell yourself you are overthinking. You tell yourself to stop being dramatic. You push the feeling aside and keep going. But the more you push, the more it returns in quiet ways, in moments of stillness, in the space between tasks, in the pause before sleep. You start feeling like you are living slightly ahead of or behind your own experience. Like your body is in one place and your awareness is hovering just outside of it. You may notice that your reactions are slower, not because you are less capable, but because you are no longer automatically engaged. You do not jump into things the way you used to. You hesitate, you pause, you observe. And while that might look like maturity from the outside, it does not feel like clarity on the inside. It feels like distance, a gentle but persistent distance. You also begin to notice that old motivations no longer work. Things that used to push you forward no longer generate the same energy. Pressure does not motivate you the way it once did. Rewards feel less compelling. Fear still exists, but it does not drive you in the same way. You can still respond to deadlines, to expectations, to responsibilities, but the internal spark that used to fuel those responses has dimmed, not disappeared, just dimmed enough for you to notice its absence. This is where many people panic internally. They assume they are losing ambition, or passion, or purpose. They worry that they are becoming numb, that something essential is fading. And because there is no clear explanation, they search for one. They may label it burnout, or existential fatigue, or emotional detachment. They may consume content, read books, look for frameworks that explain why they feel the way they do. Some of those explanations offer temporary relief. They give language, they give context, but they do not fully resolve the feeling, because what is happening is not a malfunction, it is a transition. And transitions rarely feel clear from the inside, especially when you are still standing in the middle of them, One of the most unsettling parts of this stage is that you begin to feel out of sync with time. Not in a mystical way, in a very practical one. Days blur together, or certain moments feel strangely heavy while others disappear quickly. You may replay conversations in your head, not because you are anxious, but because they did not land properly when they happened. You were there, but not fully there. You sense that something important passed through the moment, and you missed it, or that you were not available to it. This creates a subtle grief, not for something lost, but for something you cannot quite name. You might feel it most strongly when you are alone, not lonely, alone. When there is no role to perform and no response required, in those moments the gap becomes more noticeable. The space between who you are being and who you feel you are grows wider. You might find yourself staring at nothing, sitting without distraction longer than usual, not because you are meditating or trying to be mindful, but because your system is slowing itself down, creating space, waiting for something to catch up. This is the part almost no one talks about, because it does not look like growth. It does not feel empowering. It does not come with insights or breakthroughs. It feels like something is missing, but you cannot point to what. And because you cannot point to it, you doubt yourself. You wonder if you are just being ungrateful or difficult or disconnected from reality. You might even try to force yourself back into old enthusiasm. You try to care harder, try to feel more, try to reattach to things that once defined you. But the harder you try, the more artificial it feels. Like you are acting out a version of yourself that no longer fully exists. And that creates another layer of discomfort, because now you are not only disconnected, you are also pretending to be the person you used to be, because that version still makes sense to everyone else. This is where the quiet exhaustion begins. Not physical tiredness, a deeper one. The fatigue of maintaining alignment with a life that no longer matches your internal state. You can still do it, you are capable, but it costs more energy than it used to, and you start noticing that cost. You notice how drained you feel after normal interactions, how heavy your body feels after days that look objectively fine, how relief comes not from success but from withdrawal, from silence, from not having to perform coherence you no longer feel. None of this happens all at once. It unfolds slowly, subtly, almost kindly. That is why it is so easy to dismiss at first. But if you are honest with yourself, you know that something has been changing for a while now. You have not fallen apart. You have not lost control. You have not failed. You have simply reached a point where the old way of being no longer fits your awareness. And because the new way has not yet stabilized, you are left in between, functioning but not fulfilled, present but not anchored, stable but not settled. This is not the end of anything, but it is no longer the beginning either. It is the moment where everything still looks fine, but you no longer feel fine inside it. And that feeling is not a mistake. It is the signal that something deeper is reorganizing beneath the surface. At first, the discomfort feels passive, like something fading, like energy slowly draining. But there comes a point where the quiet disconnection turns into friction. You do not just feel distant anymore. You feel pulled backward at the exact moment you try to move forward. This is when the old structure inside you begins to resist, not loudly, not violently, but persistently. You may not even recognize it as resistance at first. It disguises itself as logic, as caution, as realism, as concern for stability. Every time you consider changing something important, a familiar voice appears. It tells you to slow down, to be practical, to not overthink, to not ruin what is already working. And because the voice sounds reasonable, you listen to it. You compromise, you delay, you adjust your expectations, but the tension does not go away. It intensifies. This is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They think the resistance means they are doing something wrong, that they are pushing too hard, that they are not ready, that they need more preparation. So they try to fix the resistance. They try to calm it. They try to negotiate with it. They look for ways to make change feel lighter, easier, more comfortable. But the more they try, the heavier everything feels. Even simple decisions begin to feel loaded. Even small changes feel exhausting. Not because they are difficult, but because something inside is actively working against them. This is the first true inner conflict, not between good and bad, not between fear and courage, but between two identities that cannot coexist much longer. The one you have lived as, and the one that is beginning to form underneath it. The old identity does not resist because it is evil or wrong. It resists because its entire function is to preserve continuity. It was built to keep you safe, predictable, acceptable. It learned how to survive in specific conditions, how to get approval, how to avoid loss, how to stay within familiar boundaries. And it has done its job well. That is why it feels so convincing. That is why it feels like you. But now something threatens its relevance. Not a crisis, not an external danger, but awareness. You are no longer fully identified with the patterns that used to define you. You see them now. You notice when you are reacting instead of choosing. You feel when you are repeating instead of responding. And that awareness destabilizes the old structure, because the old structure only works when it is unquestioned. When you were unaware, it could run automatically. Now that you are noticing it, it has to defend itself, and it does so by increasing pressure, by creating weight, by making change feel risky. This is why the desire to change often coincides with sudden fatigue. You think you are finally ready to move, and suddenly you feel tired all the time. You think you are clear about what no longer fits, and suddenly you doubt everything. You think you are about to step into something new, and suddenly anxiety appears where there was none before. This is not a sign that you are regressing. It is a sign that the old identity is tightening its grip, not to punish you, but to maintain coherence with the past. The old identity understands the world through patterns. It knows how things usually go. It predicts outcomes based on memory. It keeps you aligned with what has already happened. When you attempt to change, you are not just choosing something new. You are threatening the prediction system that has kept you oriented for years. And prediction systems do not dissolve quietly. They escalate. They amplify doubt. They replay worst-case scenarios. They remind you of what you could lose. They bring up unfinished stories, old fears, old obligations, old versions of yourself that still feel unresolved. This is why change begins to feel heavy, not because the future is wrong, but because the past is being activated all at once. Every unexamined pattern senses that its relevance is ending, and it tries to assert itself before it disappears. This can feel overwhelming. You may notice that your thoughts become more repetitive, more circular. You think about the same questions over and over without resolution. You feel like you are stuck in your own head, not because you lack answers, but because the old structure is looping, trying to stabilize itself through repetition. You may also notice emotional spikes that feel out of proportion, irritation, sadness, frustration, even anger. Emotions that seem to come from nowhere or that attach themselves to small triggers. This is not emotional immaturity. It is stored momentum releasing. When an identity structure begins to lose dominance, the emotional charge that supported it starts surfacing, not to harm you, but to be felt and discharged. But if you do not understand what is happening, it feels like something is going wrong. You think you are becoming unstable. You think you are losing control. You think you are sabotaging yourself. And so you try to regain control. You tighten discipline. You try to be more productive. You set stricter rules for yourself. You force clarity. You force positivity, you force movement. And every time you force something, the resistance increases. Because force belongs to the old paradigm. The old identity understands force. It responds to pressure. But the emerging state does not. The emerging state requires something else. And because that something else is unfamiliar, the old structure interprets it as danger. This is why the moment you want change the most is often the moment you feel the least capable of moving. Your energy drops. Your motivation disappears. Your body feels heavy. Your mind becomes foggy. You interpret this as failure. But it is actually a standoff. Two operating systems trying to run simultaneously, one based on memory and prediction, the other based on presence and direct perception. They cannot both lead, and the conflict between them consumes energy. This is the first real crescendo of the journey, because until now the discomfort was subtle, easy to ignore, but here it demands attention. You cannot pretend nothing is happening anymore. The old ways no longer feel neutral, they feel restrictive. The new way does not yet feel safe, it feels undefined. So you are caught between tightening and letting go, between holding on and stepping forward, and neither option feels easy. This is where many people turn back, not because they want to, but because the pressure becomes too much. They choose familiarity over uncertainty. They re-identify with the old structure and call it maturity or realism or responsibility. And for a time, that works, but the awareness does not disappear, it waits. For you, this waiting has likely already happened. You have already tried to go back, to re-engage fully with who you were, and it did not work. Something in you refused to fully re-enter the old shape. That refusal is not rebellion, it is alignment. The reason everything feels heavier when you try to change is not because change is wrong, it is because you are trying to change while still carrying the full weight of an identity that is designed to prevent change. The heaviness is not a sign to stop. It is the sign that the old structure is reaching its limit. It can no longer carry you forward, and it knows it, so it resists, quietly, relentlessly, until you recognize that the struggle is not between effort and laziness, or courage and fear. It is between an identity that has completed its function and an awareness that has outgrown it. And that recognition does not resolve the conflict yet, but it prepares you for what comes next. Because once you see that the resistance is structural, not personal, you stop blaming yourself. And when self-blame drops, something important begins to shift beneath the struggle. At a certain point, the struggle stops feeling psychological. It no longer feels like fear or doubt or confusion. It starts to feel mechanical, as if something inside you is slightly out of sync with itself. You are not broken, you are not failing, you are misaligned. And misalignment has a very specific sensation. It feels like effort without progress, movement without traction, intention without follow-through. You know what you want. You even know what no longer fits. But the moment you try to act from that, knowing something slips, energy drains, focus scatters, the body hesitates. This is where language usually fails, because the experience is not emotional in the usual sense. It is systemic. Imagine two rhythms playing at the same time. Each one is clear on its own, but together they create interference, not noise, interference. Peaks cancel each other out. Momentum disappears. That is what coherence loss feels like inside a human system. You are carrying two signals simultaneously, one coming from memory, one coming from awareness, and they are no longer synchronized. The old signal is familiar. It is built from repetition, from past outcomes, from learned expectations. It knows how things usually go. It predicts based on what has already happened. The new signal is quieter, but more precise. It comes from direct perception, from presence, from sensing rather than remembering. It does not rely on past data. It responds to what is actually here. When these two signals are aligned, life feels smooth. Effort translates into result. Thought translates into action. Time feels cooperative. But when they begin to drift out of phase, something strange happens. You experience friction without impact. You apply effort and feel tired, but nothing changes. You rest, but do not recover. You think clearly, but feel blocked. This is not because you lack discipline or clarity. It is because coherence is breaking down, not collapsing, just slipping. And the human nervous system is extremely sensitive to this. Long before the mind can explain it, the body registers it as unease, restlessness, fatigue, a vague sense of wrongness. You may notice that your breathing becomes shallower when you think about certain decisions, that your shoulders tense when you imagine stepping forward, that your stomach tightens when you consider letting something go. These are not emotional reactions in the way we usually describe them. They are signals from a system that is trying to resolve conflicting inputs. In physics, coherence describes what happens when elements of a system move in phase, when their oscillations support rather than cancel each other. In the human experience, coherence feels like alignment, thought feeling true in the body, action feeling natural rather than forced, identity feeling continuous rather than fragmented. When coherence is high, you do not need to motivate yourself. Movement emerges. When coherence drops, you experience drag. Not resistance from the outside, but drag from within. The reason this stage feels so confusing is because both signals inside you feel valid. The old one has history, evidence, proof. The new one has immediacy, clarity, presence. Neither feels wrong, but they cannot both lead. And until one takes precedence, your system remains in a state of partial cancellation. This is why you can understand something deeply and still fail to live it. The understanding is real, but it is not coherent with the baseline signal. Your body is still running. The body is not convinced, not because it is stupid, but because it has been trained by repetition, by survival, by what kept you safe before. Coherence is not created by insight alone. It is created when insight is trusted at the level of the nervous system. And trust at that level does not respond to arguments. It responds to consistency, when the new signal appears only occasionally. In moments of clarity or inspiration, the system treats it as an anomaly, interesting but unreliable. It notes it, but it does not reorganize around it. Meanwhile, the old signal has been reinforced thousands of times through action, through reaction, through habit, through outcome. So even when you consciously want to change, the deeper system continues broadcasting the old frequency, not because it is sabotaging you, but because from its perspective, it is maintaining stability. This is why people often say they feel like they are living two lives, one inside, one outside, one that sees clearly, one that keeps repeating. The gap between them is not a moral failure. It is a coherence gap, and coherence gaps have consequences. When coherence drops, the system becomes inefficient. Energy leaks, attention fragments, emotions fluctuate unpredictably. You might feel suddenly overwhelmed by things that used to feel manageable, or strangely detached from things that used to matter deeply. This is not regression, it is signal interference. Two operating frequencies competing for dominance. The mind often tries to resolve this by choosing sides. It tries to suppress the old signal or amplify the new one. It uses force, affirmation, discipline, control. But force increases noise. It does not restore coherence. It actually makes the interference worse. because the body senses the strain, and strain confirms instability. The more you try to push yourself into a new state, the more the old system tightens its grip. Not to punish you, but to prevent what it perceives as chaos. This is why people at this stage often feel stuck in preparation. They are always almost ready, always integrating, always working on themselves. Because staying in preparation allows both signals to coexist without resolution. It delays the moment when one must take the lead, but delay has a cost. The longer coherence remains split, the more exhausted the system becomes, because it is constantly compensating, constantly adjusting, constantly managing internal contradiction. This exhaustion is not laziness. It is not burnout from doing too much. It is fatigue from running incompatible processes simultaneously. Over time, you may notice that your intuition becomes sharper but harder to act on. You sense what is right immediately, but following through feels heavy. Not emotionally heavy, physically heavy, like moving through resistance. This is a classic sign that awareness has advanced faster than embodiment. The perception system has updated, the action system has not, and until they realign, friction remains. What makes this stage feel so personal is that it shows up in very human ways, in relationships, in work, in creativity. You may feel like you are showing up as a version of yourself that is slightly behind your awareness, saying things, are no longer fully true, agreeing to dynamics you already see through, participating in patterns you can predict but not yet exit cleanly. This creates an internal dissonance that cannot be resolved through analysis alone, because analysis operates at the level of thought, and the problem exists at the level of signal. You are not lacking information, you are lacking coherence between what you know and what you trust enough to embody. And trust here does not mean belief. It means the nervous system relaxing into the new signal as safe, familiar, predictable. That takes time, not because you are slow, but because biological systems change gradually. They need repeated confirmation, not from ideas, but from lived experience. This is why moments of alignment feel so relieving. Those moments when you act from the new signal and everything flows. When you speak honestly and the body relaxes. When you say no and feel lighter. When you follow an impulse that is not logical and it works. Those moments are brief but powerful. They show you what coherence feels like. But because they are brief, the system does not yet reorganize around them. It treats them as exceptions, not as the new rule. So you oscillate, you touch coherence, then fall back into interference, over and over. This oscillation is not a failure, it is a transition pattern. Systems rarely shift smoothly from one stable state to another. They fluctuate, they test, they overshoot and correct. From the inside, this feels messy, uncertain, sometimes discouraging. But from a systemic perspective, it is precise. You are not lost. You are recalibrating. The challenge is that recalibration requires patience. And patience is hard when you can already see where you are meant to be. You want alignment now because you can feel it. You can sense how close it is. But closeness does not equal readiness. Readiness at this level is not a decision. It is a state of coherence. And coherence cannot be forced. It emerges when the system has enough evidence that the new signal is stable, that it will not disappear, that it will not endanger survival. This is why the path through this stage does not involve pushing harder. It involves staying present long enough for the new signal to prove itself through consistency, not through intensity. Small actions aligned with awareness, repeated calmly, without drama. Each time you act from presence and nothing bad happens, the nervous system takes note. Each time you trust your perception and the ground holds, the system relaxes a little more. Over time, the interference weakens. The signals begin to synchronize and coherence starts to rebuild. But while you are still inside the gap, it feels like nothing is happening, like you are stuck, like you are circling the same insight without landing. That feeling is not telling you to quit. It is telling you that you are between frequencies, and being between frequencies is uncomfortable by nature because nothing fully resolves there. But it is also the only place where reorganization can occur, because the old structure is no longer dominant and the new one is not yet fixed. This is the zone where awareness starts to descend into the body, when knowing starts to become being, where coherence begins to matter more than effort. And even if you cannot explain it yet, even if you cannot feel stable yet, something in you already understands this at a deeper level, because you would not still be here otherwise. There comes a moment when the tension stops oscillating and starts breaking, not in a dramatic explosion, not in a visible collapse, but in a quiet, irreversible way. You do not wake up one day feeling transformed. You wake up realizing that going back is no longer possible. The old frequency does not hold the same weight anymore. It still exists. You can still access it. You can still perform it if you need to, but it no longer feels real enough to live inside. This is the moment when the old signal begins to collapse under its own inconsistency, not because you attacked it, not because you rejected it, but because you stopped feeding it unconsciously. The collapse does not happen all at once. It happens in layers, small moments where the old reactions no longer fully activate. Situations that used to trigger you now feel strangely flat. Conversations that once pulled you into familiar roles now feel transparent. You see the pattern forming before it completes, and because you see it, you cannot fully enter it.